Jonah's heart beat heavily within his chest as he walked away from his home. The words of the Lord still rang in his ears, echoing with a weight he could not silence. Go to Nineveh. Every step he took was not simply a step toward Joppa, but a step of defiance, a deliberate turning of his back on the one who had called him. His mind wrestled with itself. Part of him knew there was no escaping the God of Israel, no hiding from the maker of heaven and earth. But another part of him clung to the thought that distance might dull the voice, that perhaps if he could bury himself in the noise of distant lands, he could bury his responsibility too. His sandals struck the dusty road with stubborn rhythm. With every step, the weight of rebellion grew heavier, but his pride refused to bend. The road to Joppa was long and winding, lined with olive groves and small villages where people went about their ordinary lives. Farmers worked their fields, children laughed as they played, merchants carried goods on donkeys. Life was simple, predictable, yet Jonah's heart was far from peaceful. As he passed by familiar sights, guilt gnawed at him. He knew that prophets were not meant to choose comfort over calling. He had preached to Israel before. He had declared God's warnings to his own people. But Nineveh? Why Nineveh? He thought of the tales of Assyrian cruelty, of prisoners flayed alive, of families torn apart, of cities burned to ash. He thought of the mocking idols in their temples, the blood of the innocent spilled on their streets. Why should they be spared? Jonah muttered under his breath. Why should God's mercy extend to them? His resentment hardened into determination. If God wanted a messenger, let it not be him. When he finally reached Joppa, the city assaulted his senses. The port was alive with clamor and activity. Wooden carts rattled over cobblestones, laden with goods brought from distant lands. Cedar from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, glass from Sidon. The air was thick with the scent of fish drying in the sun, mingled with the pungent spices of traders' stalls. The shouts of sailors rang out across the harbor as they hauled ropes, adjusted sails, and loaded cargo onto ships bound for faraway lands. Seagulls circled overhead, screeching as they dove for scraps. Jonah stood still for a moment, watching the chaos unfold. To the ordinary eye, it was a scene of business and trade. To Jonah, it was an escape. Here, among the noise and confusion, he could vanish into obscurity. Here he could find a ship that would take him as far away as possible from Nineveh, from Israel, from God's command. His eyes scanned the harbor until they rested upon a vessel preparing to depart for Tarshish. The very name stirred a strange mixture of relief and determination in Jonah's heart. Tarshish was a place of legend, a distant city across the sea, known for its trade in precious metals and exotic goods. Some said it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, near the edge of the known world. To Jonah, it represented the ultimate escape, the farthest possible distance from the command of God. If Nineveh was east, Tarshish was west. If Nineveh was near, Tarshish was beyond the horizon. He approached the ship, its hull sturdy and dark with pitch, its mast tall against the sky. Sailors bustled about, tying ropes, securing barrels, shouting instructions. Jonah's heart pounded as he approached the captain. His hand trembled slightly as he offered the fare. The captain, glancing briefly at him, took the coins and nodded. The deal was done. Jonah's escape seemed secure. He stepped aboard the ship, the wooden planks creaking under his weight. The salty air stung his nostrils and the deck swayed gently beneath his feet. Sailors shouted as they prepared for departure, their voices mingling with the cry of gulls and the crash of waves. Jonah made his way below deck, into the dim, cramped space where cargo was stored and travelers could rest. The air was heavy with the smell of tar, damp wood, and salted fish. Jonah found a corner and sat down, his back against the wall. He let out a long breath, as though releasing the tension of his decision. It is done, he thought. I am free. No one will find me here. No one will drag me to Nineveh. I will vanish into Tarshish, and the matter will be finished. Yet even as he tried to reassure himself, a gnawing unease lingered in his chest. Above deck, the sailors shouted and pulled at the rigging. The anchor was raised, the sails unfurled, and the ship glided out of the harbor. Jonah felt the subtle shift as the vessel caught the wind and began its journey westward, away from the land of Israel. He closed his eyes, trying to imagine the distance growing with each passing wave. Perhaps, he thought, God would relent. Perhaps God would send another prophet. Perhaps Nineveh would never hear his voice. But even as he tried to silence his conscience, he could not silence the truth he knew. The God he served was not like the gods of other nations. He was not confined to a temple or a land. He was the Lord of heaven and earth, the maker of the sea and dry land. Could such a God truly be escaped? At first, the voyage was calm. The sea stretched out in endless blue, the sky clear and bright. The sailors, accustomed to the rhythms of the sea, moved about with practiced ease, adjusting sails, sharing stories, laughing over past journeys. Jonah tried to convince himself that all was well. The sound of waves against the hull lulled him, and he leaned against the wooden planks, weary from his journey and the weight of his rebellion. Yet the peace did not last. The sea, obedient to its creator, began to shift. The wind changed suddenly, sharp and cold. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in with unnatural speed, swallowing the sun. The sailors grew quiet, glancing at one another with unease. The waves, once gentle, rose higher, slapping against the sides of the ship. The wind grew stronger, tearing at the sails, howling through the rigging. The storm came quickly, like a predator pouncing on its prey. Within moments, the ship was tossed violently, waves crashing over the deck, water pouring in from every side. The sailors shouted in panic, their voices barely audible above the roar of wind and sea. They threw ropes, tried to secure the sails, bailed water with frantic speed. But the storm only grew fiercer, the waves rising like mountains, the wind howling like a beast unleashed. The ship groaned under the strain, creaking as though it might split apart at any moment. The sailors cried out, each to his own God. Their voices rose in desperate prayers, their hands lifted to idols of wood and stone, begging for deliverance. Some knelt, clutching amulets and charms. Others shouted names of foreign deities, pleading for mercy. But their gods were silent, powerless against the fury of the storm. In terror, they began to throw cargo overboard, precious goods cast into the sea in a desperate attempt to lighten the ship. Barrels, crates, sacks, all were sacrificed to the waves. Their hands bled from the ropes, their bodies strained against the weight of the storm, but nothing seemed to help. The sea raged on, relentless, furious, unyielding. And Jonah? Jonah was not on deck. He was below, deep in the belly of the ship, asleep. It was not a peaceful sleep, but the heavy slumber of a man running from his conscience. Perhaps exhaustion had overtaken him after days of inner turmoil. Perhaps his heart, heavy with guilt, had forced his body into unconsciousness. But while the sailors fought for their lives, Jonah lay in darkness, trying to escape not only Nineveh, but the storm within his soul. The captain, drenched with rain, his face etched with desperation, stumbled below deck. He found Jonah asleep, and his anger flared. Shaking him violently, he shouted, "How can you sleep? Get up! Call on your God! Maybe he will take notice of us, so that we will not perish." Jonah awoke, the captain's words piercing his mind like arrows. He knew the truth. This storm was no ordinary storm. This was the hand of the Lord pursuing him across the sea. The sailors, realizing the storm was no natural event, gathered to cast lots, an ancient practice to discern guilt. Stones clattered on the deck, the men holding their breath. The lot fell upon Jonah. All eyes turned to him, fear and suspicion mingling in their gaze. The sailors demanded answers, their voices trembling with urgency. "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" Jonah's heart pounded. He could no longer hide. With heavy words, he confessed, "I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." At his words, the sailors froze. The God who made the sea? The very sea that now raged around them? Terror gripped their hearts. Jonah admitted his guilt. He was fleeing from the Lord's command, and now they were caught in the storm of his disobedience.